Hello, everyone.
Hello everyone. This is Sadhana Alankar, HL7's Director of Education, welcoming you to what promises to be an interesting presentation. Elliot Silver will be moderating the question and answer session. And as you can see, Ryan Howell is all ready to start his presentation. So at this time, I'm going to hand over the program to Ryan. Hi, Ryan.
Hello.
All yours.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity. Yesterday, we had an opportunity to present an overview of the work that the CARIN Alliance is doing around advancing consumer-facing data exchange. And today, what we'd like to do is be able to provide more technical guidance on additional things that we are doing, especially in terms of showing you a demonstration around how individuals can actually get connected to a FHIR server and what that looks like in terms of CARIN Blue Button. We have a great team with us today. Myself, Mo Vaez, and Pat Taylor are technical co-leads for the CARIN Blue Button implementation guide. Pooja Barba and Frank McKinney, who has been leading our real-time pharmacy benefit check work group, and Mark Scrimshire, who's going to be able to show that demo from Onyx Health, and then Dr. Louis Moss, who is going to talk about UDAP and how that relates to the work that we're doing in CARIN Blue Button. So I am going to give a very, very quick overview and then turn it over to my colleagues here. But just so folks know who we are, the CARIN Alliance was formed about 4 years ago with the desire to advance the ability for consumers and their caregivers to get, use, and share their digital health information. And it is exclusively focused on business to consumer data exchange. What's unique about us is that we focus both on the technology side as well as the policy side in helping to really break down all the policy, operational, technology barriers associated with how to actually make this happen and how to scale this across the country. And so our desire is to find ways to make that happen. We've got about 75 organizations participating in CARIN today. And it's a great public-private partnership and finding ways to make that happen at scale. There are a few major projects that we're working on. And again, we've got the team here to be able to talk about them. And we're prepared to answer any questions at during the presentation or at the end. So if you've got any questions from yesterday or today, really around anything, please let us know and we'll be able to answer those. But the major work that we have going on right now is the CARIN Blue Button implementation guide work. The consumer-facing real-time pharmacy benefit check work, implementation guide work. We've got some work going on around digital identity, and we have some work going on related to the trust framework and the code of conduct for the policies associated with how apps actually access data, which includes the launch of our myhealthapplication.com website a few weeks ago. So if folks have certainly any questions around any of those topics, we'd be happy to answer them. Today, our focus is on the CMS Patient Access API and specifically CARIN Blue Button and FHIR Release 4, which includes the claims data and information from the health plans to make that available through that CMS Patient Access API via Smart OAuth request. Although this is a question we've been getting a lot lately, is the CARIN Blue Button implementation guide required under the CMS final rule? The answer to that question is no. In fact, there are no FHIR implementation guides that are required under the CMS final rule. There are suggested FHIR implementation guides under the CMS rule that CMS has provided some implementation guidance for developers and payers alike to make that happen. I think the challenge that payers will have is if they decide not to implement the CARIN Blue Button implementation guide. Two main challenges exist. One is they'll have to publish their own API technical documentation in a publicly available format that allows for individual apps to be able to access that information. And then two is they'll need to find an app that will build a custom interface to access that information from them. Both are important and required to be able to implement the CMS final rule. And so that becomes a little bit tricky because it kind of defies some of the things that we're trying to work for within healthcare, which is broad-based interoperability. So did want to kind of call that out here at the beginning. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Louis Moss to talk a little bit about UDAP.
Louis, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. I was muted by the organizer, I think. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Thanks, everybody, and thanks for staying till the end of the day. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Unified Data Access Profiles, or UDAP here, how they fit into the CARIN work, including the CARIN implementation guide for consumer-facing apps that Ryan was just referencing, and hopefully help you understand how this fits into the whole infrastructure that we're discussing, and segue into some of the other work that CARIN is doing that relates to this before we get to Mark's demo. So what are the Unified Data Access Profiles? If you have been looking at some of these implementation guides, including the CARIN Blue Button implementation guide, or the DaVinci project implementation guides, or even the proposed security solutions from ONC's Fire at Scale Task Force, you will have come across this term, UDAP. It is, in fact, a collection of open standard profiles that are intended to scale the Fire ecosystem, which is why they're finding use in these guides that I've listed here at the third bullet point. The main topics that we'll talk about briefly today amongst these profiles are trusted dynamic client registration, client app authentication authorization, user authentication, and certifications and endorsements, especially for client apps. It's important to note that this is a layer on top of FHIR that relates to the authentication and authorization of the apps and the users. It is not part of the FHIR standard. So it's more closely related to the OAuth standards that you're probably familiar with to secure these consumer-facing apps. In fact, the UDAP profiles are built on top of OAuth 2.0, the OpenID Connect profiles, the public key infrastructure profiles, digital signature techniques, including JWTs, which are JSON Web Tokens. And we often get asked about how this relates to SMART and the Smart App Launch Framework. This takes off a little bit about where the Smart App Launch Framework left off. So in SMART, for example, there is suggestion that you should use a dynamic client registration procedure, but it's left out of scope for the actual Smart App Launch Framework. So UDAP takes off at that point and adds that trusted dynamic registration framework. If we can go to the next slide. The link here for udap.org you can follow to get the profiles, or there are also references in the various IGs that I mentioned. It's not possible in 5 minutes for me to do a full deep dive into exactly how these things are implemented. So I will refer you to the profiles and implementation guides. And of course, if there are any questions that you have either during this conference or afterwards, please feel free to contact me or reach out to the UDAP community about it. The main focus to start for in this short discussion is on the concept of the trusted registration. In consumer-facing app workflows, especially those centered around OAuth, there is a process wherein this extra actor, the client application that the user is using, needs to register with the data holder, the entity with the data. And in the current models that exist in the healthcare space, this is a very manual process. You, as a client app developer, go one by one to each health IT developer website, or even in some cases, if there's a one health IT platform used by many payers or providers, individually to each payer and provider, fill out an online form, start a process, interact with their registration staff in many cases, and over a back and forth of several interactions, eventually you get a client ID. Which you then use to access the API on behalf of your users. That doesn't work very well, and it's a very manual process that ultimately results in many, many application stores. Effectively, if you're familiar with the app stores from the big mobile vendors. You know, there are only a couple of mobile platforms, so that, you know, people are okay with 2 or 3 app stores for phones, but 2,000 app stores for provider or payer-facing systems, much less acceptable to the population and much less beneficial to everyone involved because of all of the duplication work, especially when FHIR, as it is implemented and as the CARIN Blue Button IG lays it out, is actually providing a common API that all of these different entities can use to present this data, and all of these apps can use this data. It does seem extremely redundant to have to then have a separate registration process to use a common API. So we really need to find out a way, figure a way to streamline this process so that an application can register one time with a network or with a trust community and use that to automatically go through that process to get that client ID in every stage. The UDAP client authentication authorization also steps up the security a little bit from the basic client secret model that is so common today to a private key infrastructure, which is suitable for confidential applications that are accessing sensitive data, stepping up that security to asymmetric cryptography. User authentication, I'll talk about in the last bullet point, and then before we segue to Mark. And the credentials, or the certifications and endorsements, the last thing I mentioned, that gives client applications a way to advertise or present information to these data holders about additional certifications that they may have achieved or additional best practices that they may be following, like the CARIN Code of Conduct. So by adopting this framework and implementing this on the data holder side and in the client app implementations, we're providing a mechanism and in fact even an incentive for the applications to follow these best practices and to share information about it. So there are lots of ways that this can work into, cover a little bit in the next slide too, but the real key point is this middle bullet, that scalability is paramount. And Mark is going to, I think he's planning to share some numbers about how these this scaling is just has to be addressed before before the sharing mandatory sharing date comes to pass. So we have a little time to get this infrastructure in place, and we'll see exactly why that's important, so that we can streamline and simplify this registration of hundreds, maybe even thousands of applications across an equal number of endpoints. I'm going to take a moment here to segue now to some other work that CARIN is doing around digital identity federation or trust communities for digital identity. The APIs, as they stand generally today, make use of individual user credentials at each point of contact where they want to collect, where a user may want to collect data. And that is the starting point. But CARIN is looking ahead to the greater goal of making this even, just as we've talked about streamlining identity so that client apps can reusably connect across the network. CARIN is looking to do the same thing for users. And the big red arrow there is showing the focus to create a framework of contractual terms and conditions based on appropriate technologies that would allow users to have a reusable digital identity with strong authentication that health plans, EHRs, and providers, applications, and identity vendors can all trust and share in an interoperable manner. So this is an open consensus-based process that's underway now to try to build that framework. Ideally, this could be part of TEFCA or other health information networks that are participating, although it can stand alone, especially if the scope goes beyond what TEFCA is envisioning. And one of the key elements that ties nicely into UDAP is that this framework is based around a collection of one or more independent certifiers that the different actors in the system can approach to get the required stamp of approval that they meet the minimum bars to participate in this ecosystem, the digital identity and authentication ecosystem. So the UDAP tiered OAuth in particular and the authentication authorization profiles are parts of the technology that support this and would eventually let you step forward into this more reusable framework without having to rip and replace the whole authorization and authentication framework that that has already been laid into your application or your data service. So I'll stop there. I'll turn it back over to Ryan to see if he wants to add anything else here, and then we'll go on to the demo.
That was perfect, Louis. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. And let's just move right into Mark. Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. So one thing I've got to say about UDAP is actually at Fire DevDays last year, I did a demo of basically the mechanism of UDAP, which is really building on a blog, would you believe, I wrote for CMS and HHS back in 2015 about we need to solve this problem. We did some math recently to Louis' point that if the 60 applications that have currently applied to connect to CMS Blue Button actually did that for the other 900 and odd plans around the country, the combined effort to get through those approval processes would add up to about 75 person years. We need to solve this problem. The problem is not scalable. And so for those of you that don't know me, as Mark Scrimshaw, I was the entrepreneur in residence and the CMS Blue Button innovator. I was the first person on the CMS Blue Button project. I now spend my days at Onyx going and apologizing to health plans because Blue Button is basically the example in the CMS mandate that everybody is now busy trying to apply. And what we've done at Onyx, Onyx is a subsidiary of New Wave. New Wave is the company that built the Blue Button API for CMS. We took everything that we learned in that process and have put it into a platform as a service solution we call Sapphire, or secure architecture for fire. And really the message there is delivering the solution to meet the mandate is far more than just building a fire API. You need to deal with user authentication, API management and security testing. It's all there in the mandate. And also there's areas that you're not necessarily familiar with as a plan. Effectively, how do you get this app marketplace if you're going to go out on your own? How do you go and develop, recruit developers, and how do you provide them with all the documentation, and how do you administer those apps? And then you've still got to import those 5 years worth of data. It's a big ask. We could spend a lot of time just doing mapping around data. So the CARIN Alliance with the Blue Button IG has really done a lot to try and address that, but by providing the CPCDS data ingestion format. And what I want to do today is to actually take my life in my hands, and we will do a live demo. So if you just want to skip over to the next slide, Ryan, people will be able to go and interact with this environment. We've put together a Connectathon environment. We use this at the last HL7 virtual Connectathon. If you haven't been to one of those, you really need to do that, because they are tremendous events where we really sort out issues with with various implementation guides. I am now going to try taking control of the screen, and I am going to try doing a live demo. So please bear with me. It's always fun doing this. So this is, if you follow the link that was up on the previous screen, at bit.ly Sapphire-Connectathon, you'll come to this page. What I'm going to do is to go into two modes, right? I am either going to be a payer, or I'm going to be an application developer, and I want to show both sides. So what we're going to take you through is the steps you would go through to request a set of credentials. This is not yet using UDAP, but we have that on our roadmap. But we then want to actually show how hard it is for the payer with Sapphire to actually issue those credentials to a developer. And if you go and sign up, so if you follow the links, click on the link as a developer, you can go and click and sign up now, and we will get you going over the course of Fire DevDays if you want to experiment with the API. So I am actually signed in as a developer over here. So I've been experimenting with a number of applications. So I've got a private window so I can actually have two things running at the same time. I'm going to actually sign in as a payer. So I want to be able to approve applications, and hopefully I won't fat finger too much. So now this is my payer dashboard, and I can see things like application requests that have come in and whether something has been revoked or approved. And I can also see if I want to approve or reject an application. So now let's switch to being an application developer. So you've signed up, you've verified your email address, and you've logged into the Sapphire platform as a developer. And the obvious thing you want to do, if you're anything like me, is I want to go and register an application. So let's go and do that. So one of the things every app has a name. So Fire Dev Days Awesomeness. And sometimes I can't even spell, but that's okay. You'll forgive me, please. This is and we would enter a callback URL, so we can use something like just localhost. We could also enter in additional ones if we wanted, if we had. And so we go and add our information. And we need to obviously provide a payer with some useful information, like what's my privacy policy? So let's put a reference to that. And we may well have terms of service. So let's enter that as well. And as Ryan and Louis mentioned, maybe as a developer, I've actually attested to a trust framework, a code of conduct, like the CARIN Alliance trust framework. So let's see if we can put a pointer to where we put that letter. I then may need to add in some support information. So I'm just going to put an email address for now. And then I can choose one or more implementation guides. So in this instance, we just have the one implementation guide, the CARIN Blue Button IG. And what I want to do is to now apply to Diamond Health, that's the payer that I logged in with, to say, can you approve my application? So I'm going to enter that in there. And let's now actually submit the application. And I get a message that the app has been successfully created. So now let's go across to the payer. So the payer gets a message. They obviously want to see who wants to sign up. So I'm just going to refresh the screen and see if there we have it at the top of our list there, the Fire DevDays Awesomeness. And so I can go and look at the information that's been supplied. So if I was anything like CMS, I would gather a team together and we would review the privacy policy and the terms of service, and we'd probably go and take a look that the callback URLs make sense, that they're not going somewhere really strange. You know, check that there's support available, and see which implementation guides they've actually attested to, and or requesting. And so I would get together with my colleagues, we'd make a deliberation, is all of this okay? And we then make a decision. And so according to the rules, we have to have objective criteria for doing that. So let's assume that we agree that this app has done all the right things, it's got a good privacy policy in terms of service and so on. So we're going to approve that app. So I'm going to now go back at that as a developer. I would go in and let's see if we have got a refresh, and I would have got a message as a developer saying, hey, your app has been approved. So I could go down the list and see, yes, there's the app. It's been approved for Diamond Health. If it didn't get approved, maybe it was in the rejected or revoked. And so what we do is, you know, I'm an eager developer. I want to go and get to work. So I can go and see the record, and I can click on the app credentials. And now what I can do, if probably like many of you, you want to actually interact with the API. Now this is all pretty standard OAuth 2 information, things like the client ID, the client secret, your callback URL or multiple URLs, an authorization URL, and an access token URL, so that you can get access tokens and refresh tokens. The scope is a link, so this determines what you've been given access to. And then obviously the important thing, the base URL, the start of the FHIR set of resources that are going to be made available. So what I would do is I would call up something like Insomnia or Postman, depending on what platform you're on and what you prefer. And I would go to the OAuth 2 setup and I would take that information. It would be an authorization code. I would put in that authorization and access token URL, my client ID and secret, my callback URL. Let's see if I actually put that as localhost 4000. So let's be consistent. I also need to put in the scopes. So scopes are required. So I'll copy in that information. And then in a test environment, what I'm going to do now is I want to actually get a token. And we'll put up for you, and it will be in the deck, a number of synthetic user accounts that we have on the platform. And it's worth noting, we worked with Cynthia to actually extend Cynthia to include the ability to generate a CPCDS format that can then be converted to the CARIN Blue Button IG FHIR elements. So let's actually try and get a token. So what happens here is, and this is where you pray that apps work exactly as you want. Let's try it again. So what would happen at this point is Sapphire is handing over to the identity platform at the payer, where a member would enter in their same user credentials that they would use on their member portal. And once they go through that, they would then authorize the sharing. And now, once you get back with that information, you would be able to actually make a patient call. Obviously, the laws of live demos are playing havoc here. So we didn't actually get through that, but we will certainly dig into that and find out what went wrong. I could very easily have copied in the wrong information as preparation for this. So there you have it, a very simple way to make an app registration request and for a payer to approve or reject the application request so that you can then hopefully get credentials and start interacting with the API. So I think with that, Ryan, I can hand back to you and we can, I think, move on to opening up for questions. But maybe you want to throw up the next page if people want to make a note or grab a screenshot of the user accounts that we have on the platform that they can experiment with. There you go.
Awesome, Mark. Thank you. That was great. Appreciate that. So with that, we are here to answer your questions on CARIN Blue Button, on the demonstration, on consumer-facing real-time pharmacy benefit check, as we mentioned, Sapphire, the UDAP profiles, or even some of our digital identity work. So moderator, we'll turn it back over to you.
Are there any questions, Elliot? I have unmuted you, Elliot, if you want to
No,
speak.
at this time, there aren't any questions.
Okay. Well, with that, well, we have questions for everybody else. We'd love to have a dynamic conversation here, but we'd love to understand more about how each of the health plans and the payers are actually going to be registering apps. I think that's an important topic. As we mentioned at the outset, as Louis mentioned and others, I think it's important to recognize that it's going to defeat the purpose. If we have 900 app stores out there, that's certainly going to defeat the purpose of true interoperability. So making those FHIR endpoints public and then having trusted ways to use technology such as UDAP and some of the other things we've discussed is really going to be super important going forward. And so as you're thinking through the ability to register those apps, we encourage you to reach out to us for some thoughts on best practices for how to do that. Mark has shown some of those already. There's other ideas that we have out there to make that happen at scale. So we'd love to be able to continue that dialogue both here at the conference as well as offline too. So
Ryan, if
yeah.
I can comment on that, just to try and really drive home the case, when you look at the interoperability rule, one of the elements of the interoperability rule is payer-to-payer exchange, as well as the CARIN Blue Button IG that is really enabling apps to connect members' data, so members can share their data with apps of their choice. If you look at the number of health plans that are out there across the country, it's something like about 907. There is nothing stopping one health plan creating an app that their members can go and connect to previous health plans. And therefore, you can do, for those of you that love doing the math, I think it's something like 907 health plans times 906 divided by 2 is the number of credentialing connections that have to be made. This is an unscalable problem, and that is absolutely why we need UDAP.
Yeah, that's a great point. I also want to make mention too, because this question comes up a lot. Does this mean that there's going to be 500,000 health-related apps that come knocking on my door on day one, on January 1st? And the answer to that question is an emphatic no. That's not what this means. There are not 500,000 apps that actually know how to spell FHIR or have actually integrated with CMS. As Mark mentioned, I'll just highlight his comment earlier. We believe there's only around 60 apps, consumer-facing apps in the marketplace today that have a FHIR API, a consumer-facing app in production who have connected in production.
Yes,
yeah.
Ryan, I know I'm no longer the CMS Blue Button innovator, but the last figures I was aware of in around April time is, yes, there were approximately 60 apps that had been approved for production. There were about 3,000 developers across over 1,000 organizations that were connected into the CMS sandbox. So, there is a lot of latent potential there. So, don't underestimate what may be coming at you.
That's a great point. Any other questions from the community?
Hey, Ryan, this is Amol. Do you want to talk about the My Health application portal and how that might plug into answering some of the scalability issues?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So a few weeks ago, we CARIN Alliance launched what's called myhealthapplication.com. You can go out there and take a look at it. There's a set of 11 different apps, consumer-facing apps out there today who have attested to the CARIN Code of Conduct. They have gone on record saying that we are going to follow the best practices and principles that are in the CARIN Code. The reason that is important is because it is a vendor and technology neutral location where all those apps can be listed in a single place. And so not only can consumers go out there and look for apps that have attested to the code, but in addition to that, certainly if you're a payer and you're trying to be compliant with the CMS final rule and you're looking for those apps who are following those best practices, that's a great place to go to be able to reach out and to contact them to learn more about how you potentially could partner and test. Many of those apps have been with us for quite some time. They have been through multiple Connectathons. They have tested the CARIN Blue Button API in those Connectathons and been able to connect. And so they're going through the process as we speak, in fact, with linking to those individual plans. To Amol's point, what we're looking to do with that platform is use that as a platform to be able to be able to add that technology, for example, the UDAP technology, to be able to implement it, tier OAuth and some of the other technologies that Louis didn't have opportunity to speak to, in being able to send trusted tokens back and forth so that we know whether or not that that specific app actually has attested to the CARIN Code of Conduct. And that way, from a technological perspective, we can leverage some of the work that Louis and his team has done around being able to dynamically register those apps as well, and do that nearly in real time. Again, you know, we can't emphasize enough, health plans are not in the app registration business. That is not a business you want to be in. It's not a revenue producing business because access to healthcare information for individual members is free according to the CMS rule. And so what we're trying to do is to emphasize the fact that we want to streamline this and work with the industry to streamline this as much as we possibly can, based on current best practices and standards that are available out there, both from a technology and a policy perspective. We've been working for many months, many years actually, to try to make that happen and to tee this up in a way that is reusable and open to the community to use these artifacts as needed. So that's definitely a goal we have, and definitely something that we would love to continue to work with you on going forward. Anything else from our team that we want to chime in on? Okay. Well, don't want to take up too much more of your time. We really appreciate everybody's participation today. Again, here's a link to everyone's contact information here at the bottom. Feel free to reach out to any of us for more information. Love to see you on the CARIN calls and the upcoming Connectathons, as well as, like I said, answer any questions you may have as part of this effort. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Demonstrations can be very tricky. Nicely done. Thanks, Elliot, for moderating the question and answer session. Thanks, everyone, for participating in this session. Talk to you again tomorrow. Till we meet again, this is Sadhana Alangar signing off. Bye, everyone.